I'm Eli Nathans. I'm a member of the Program Committee of the Washtenaw County Democratic Party. I'm going to serve as moderator for this discussion. The candidates have agreed to, or accepted, the rules that the committee proposed for this forum. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to make introductory remarks. I will then pose a series of questions based on questions that were submitted in advance of the forum and that have just been submitted by you now. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer each question. Each question will be general, so each candidate could answer the question, and not directed at one candidate alone. At the end of the question period, each candidate will have 3 minutes to sum up and make a few closing remarks. The order of presentations and answers will rotate. At 2 minutes and 30 seconds, our timekeeper will display a yellow sign. And at 3 minutes, she will display a red sign. We ask you please to respect the time limits. I also ask you not to applaud after individual remarks. You'll have a chance to applaud at the beginning and the end. I should note that this forum is being videotaped. In fact, we have 2 videotapers. And so it may be posted on YouTube. So draw your own conclusions about behavior. Would you please now welcome the candidates? Michelle Deatrick will make the first opening statement.
Thank you so much to all of you for being here and to the Washtenaw County Dems for organizing this forum. My name is Michelle Deatrick and I am the Vice Chair of the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners. It is my passion and my life work to fight for a better future for our community. I am a former Peace Corps volunteer, I'm a mom, I'm a former policy analyst, I'm a beginning farmer with the emphasis there on beginning. I'm a poetry teacher and I am an award-winning poet. Poets use a technique called defamiliarization. And have you ever had that experience where you walk into a room and it has a bad smell, but after a while you don't notice it anymore? That's the technique that the corrupt politicians in Lansing and DC and the forces of big money behind them are using. They want us to get used to the stink in this state, which is underfunded schools and underpaid teachers, to the stink in our cities, which is lead in the water of Flint, which is the water turned off in Detroit, which is the dioxin plume creeping slowly underground toward 85% of Ann Arbor's water supply, to the stink which is gun violence in our places of worship and in our schools, and to the stink which is the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. What good politicians do is what poets do, in part. They defamiliarize. They call attention to the stink in the state and in this country. I had a teenage mom, and as I was growing up, my dad had 2 jobs. My mom took night classes and eventually earned the first college degree in either family. My parents are my inspiration. I started working when I was age 12. I worked through high school, I worked through college, and thanks to low interest, federally guaranteed student loans, many of you here may remember those. When I graduated, I was in a position to join the Peace Corps and to consider going to graduate school. My family is living testament to the fact that the forces of big money and power in Lansing and DC have forgotten that government can be a force for equality and for compassion and for prosperity. We don't have to have a state like this. I am running for children from families like mine. I'm running to build the movement that we need to successfully create a Michigan that is more compassionate and caring. I'm running to take a bold, authentic, progressive stance to Lansing, where I'm going to fight for clean air and water, for thriving public schools, and for all of us, and for an economy that works for everyone, not just the 0.001%. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Irwin. I'm running to be your next state senator here in the 18th District, and I'm happy to be with you. I want to thank the WCDP for setting up the forum, all of you for coming, and my co-competitors here for making this race an interesting one. Many of you know me. I've been serving the community for almost 20 years, and so many of you have a sense of what I'm about and what I've accomplished, but hopefully throughout the course of this forum, I can explain some of those things and give you an idea of the passions that bring me to this table and the ideas that bring me to public service. But I just want to talk about what's happening as well in Lansing. We have a situation right now in Lansing where things are going the wrong direction. They're going the wrong direction because of big money. They're going the wrong direction because of gerrymandered districts. And they're also going the wrong direction because of term limits. We have a cadre of politicians up in Lansing who get there with a lot of ideas, but without a lot of experience. We used to have folks in the legislature who served in local government, who understood what it was like in the mental health group homes, who had been in classrooms with teachers, who had been down to the homeless shelter to serve food, who had met the people in our community that were struggling, who had spent years with them trying to understand how these issues really play out. Because if there were easy answers, the easy solutions would have already been found. So I'm running because I'm passionate about having great schools in every zip code, no matter what the income is. I'm passionate about having universal early childhood education. I want smart, capable young people who are from families that don't have means to have an opportunity to go to college and to get help doing that. I want to create more opportunities for job training. I want to create jobs with a broad new investment in Michigan's road and water infrastructure. I want to protect our environment. And for 10 years, my job with the League of Conservation Voters was to develop great environmental policy and then score legislators on how well they did on advancing that policy. So I bring a particular zeal to the area of environmental protection because I know that a younger Jeff Irwin is sitting back there judging an older Jeff Irwin when he was in the State House saying, did you really do it? Did you really push the envelope? Did you really introduce that cutting edge policy and fight for it? Did you really work behind the scenes and do the legislative actions besides just voting and proposing bills, but did you actually work with the administration? Did you try to improve the process of state government? So I stand here before you for election for the Michigan State Senate, and I would encourage you to take a look at my record, what I've done in government, what I've done in 10 years on the county commission, what I did in 6 years as a state rep. I'm incredibly proud of my record, and I want to keep serving this community and keep pushing for that better Michigan that we all want. Thank you.
Okay, please hold your vote. Next bill.
Good morning, everyone. That's not working, is it? Good morning, everyone. I'm Matthew Miller. I'm a 22-year-old college student from the west side of Ypsilanti. I'm running for office because I grew up in the foster system. I spent 12 years, and I've seen injustices in the world. I've seen young folks funneled through the school-to-prison pipeline, capable, intelligent men and women who now are wasting away their lives behind bars, or in some cases, wasting away in a pine box in the ground. I have seen what happens when bad policy is pushed. I have lived it firsthand. My life was dictated by those in Lansing, and many of them tried and they cared, but the vast majority, the issues that our youth today face, they don't grasp it. They're not able to sympathize with the issues. So, I'm running because I see what's happening in our criminal justice system. I see the social justice issues of the world. I see that a black man in our state is 6 times more likely to end up behind bars than a white man. I see that areas of high unemployment, such as Flint and Detroit, are being forced to prove that they are trying to find work, yet counties that are generally white tend to be able to be exempted from these issues. I don't think that this is a fault of anyone in this room by any means, but it's an injustice in our state and we need to correct it. It's something that we cannot sit by and allow to continue. So beyond that, I have a member of my staff, this young man came to me back in January. He had spent years in prison. He was a former drug addict. I never really thought about the issues of mental health care and drug reform until we started talking. We've talked for weeks and weeks about the issues that he's faced. And I came to a realization. This campaign, it is not about me having a decent paying job. It's not about me advancing my resume. It's not about me at all. It's about the political have-nots in our state, those who don't have the power to step up and claim what's theirs. It's for those who have suffered through addiction, those who have felonies, the political minorities, those who don't have the power to reclaim their livelihood. So I'm running to be your next state senator because I want to bring power back to the people.
Great. Please hold your phone. Anuja Rajendra.
Good morning. How are you all doing today? I'm Anuja Rajendra, and I'm delighted to meet you all. I'm running for the Michigan State Senate in the 18th District because people in this district and across the state are making sacrifices for their loved ones, and the government isn't doing its part to support them. And I believe, and the data shows, that representation matters. People are outraged by the lack of accountability, transparency, and results in our state government. We can't go back to the old ways of trying to get things done. We live in a state, Michigan, in the United States of America in the year 2018, where we currently have one female Democratic senator, and she's term limited. That's the seat that I'm running for. We have 0 Democratic moms, 0. So when we talk about issues from gun sense to education to the environment to talent to criminal justice reform, those voices are absent from the table. We have 0 black or brown women at the table. When we continue to have wage inequality and a criminal justice system that is, not really focused on restorative justice in the way that it should be, where are those voices? We have 1 Asian American in our Michigan State Senate, and he is term limited. And it's not just something fluffy that it would be nice to have representation, but the data indicates that. I'm a daughter of immigrants. My dad came from India with a suitcase in his hand and $100 in his pocket and a dream of a better life for his family. My mom was a school teacher, but she had a hard time going to work because she had 3 kids 5 and under. I was a surprise 3rd child that no one planned on, the first in my family to be born in this country. I'm really proud of that. I was separated from my family for the first 6 years of my life living in India. And when I came back to the U.S., as I grew up over the years, working food service jobs, delivering newspapers to help support, any extra things I wanted to buy, I was acutely aware of the opportunities that I had. My educational pursuits took me to the University of Michigan, where I earned 2 degrees, industrial and operations engineering, with a focus on process improvement and manufacturing, and a business degree. And that's the lens by which I bring, the lens that I bring to this world, is how do we solve problems with a humanistic perspective? I'm really looking forward to this conversation, to talking about issues, and I look forward to the opportunity to earn your vote on August 7th and serve you as your next state senator. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The first question will go to Jeff Irwin. So, the 18th District has long been a hub for innovative entrepreneurial ventures and technological developments. We are home to WCC, EMU, and the U of M, giving us an enviable foundation for educating individuals in a broad range of skills. With that in mind, what would you do to attract new companies and talent both to our district and to the state of Michigan, as well as to encourage the growth of companies that are already here? Would you consider giving financial incentives to companies, as we did once in the past? And how can we encourage and value preparation for important skill jobs, such as in the electrical, building, trades? Thank you.
All right, so the most important economic development tool that state government has is public education. Universal, free, high-quality public education and access to higher education. That is what the state needs to do to make a long-term play for prosperity and job growth. If you look around the country and around the world, the places where great companies want to move, where great jobs are created, where innovation happens, are places that focus on education. Washtenaw County is uniquely positioned to continue to be that kind of place, and we need state government to support our institutions of higher learning and to do a much better job in making sure that our K-12 system is solid, which we are falling very far behind the other states. In fact, when the auto rescue happened and state revenues were increasing, I was in the state legislature, and I watched the Republicans take the revenue that states like Minnesota and Massachusetts were putting into education and putting into tax cuts for the rich. We need to reverse that trend. We also need to make job training more available. We also need to make sure that every single resident has health care. The most difficult thing for small businesses when they're trying to get going is to fund the health care of their employees. Employer-sponsored health care rather than universal health care is a huge drag on the labor market. It's horrible for those of us who are trying to get out there and work. And it's also horrible for small companies that are trying to start up and might want to hire a couple extra people because that healthcare expense is extremely high and it keeps rising every year much faster than inflation. So those are a couple of the things we absolutely have to do. Invest in education, make sure everyone has health care, and then obviously the question of incentives comes up. I have been on both sides of the incentive issue. I voted against pretty much all the corporate welfare that came before us in Lansing, but there are some incentives that I think are really smart and make sense. Like for instance, our brownfield credits. I helped form and formally chaired the Washtenaw County Brownfield Authority for many, many years, and we were able to use that tool to get private money from developers to clean up some of these abandoned gas stations and abandoned dry cleaners and other larger industrial polluted sites that are a real problem for redeveloping our state. And so those are some obviously things like when AK Steel came to the state legislature and wanted to get incentives while they were violating the Clean Air Act, I voted no on that. I think that our effort at MEDC, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, is very misplaced. I would much rather put those resources into education and training for workers, invest in human capital, not corporate welfare. But there are some limited opportunities, like brownfields, like obsolete property rehabilitation credits, historic district preservation credits. Those are the kinds of things where we have a clear public purpose, and the market is just not addressing those needs.
The jobs of tomorrow demand education today. We are seeing a huge lack of quality, affordable education across the state of Michigan. We are falling so far behind the rest of the country, and to be completely honest, the rest of the world. In our district, there is one vocational tech school that is not within the Ann Arbor City area, which means that the students in the Ypsilanti area have to drive long distances. The students all around the county have to drive long distances, 45 minutes up to an hour, to be able to get this education. They're losing 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, 30 weeks a year on this education to prepare themselves for the jobs of tomorrow. But I think that before we can start really even having the conversation about automation and bringing new business to our state, before we can reach that pinnacle of self-actualization, we need to start addressing the issues on the ground. How do you attract companies to a state that can't provide clean water to its citizens? How do you attract companies to a state that have food deserts like in Ypsilanti? You can't. They're going to be turned away. They're going to move on to someone who takes better care of their people. So before we can start bringing automated jobs and bringing new companies to our state, before we can start providing financial incentives for anybody, we need to start taking care of the basic needs of our people: food, water, shelter, and clothing. Because beyond that, we're just spinning our wheels.
So this is a very important question, and it's complicated. Because what are the reasons why somebody chooses to move to a community? You know, my vision for Michigan is that we become a state that my kids and your kids and grandkids want to move to, and we don't have to fly across the country to go visit them. We can go in a car or ride on a bike and go visit our kids. It's the type of state that people want to stay in. And right now that's not happening for a number of reasons. And we've talked about education and some of the social support systems, and that's very important. So what is it that drives talent toward a state? You know, I have an engineering degree and a business degree from Michigan, and most of my colleagues, my classmates, fled the state. I was in the minority in staying here because I love the state. And when I talk to them about coming here, there's a whole slew of reasons why it's not on their radar. So, one is infrastructure. We've talked about that. But then there's also the social infrastructure. So we need to make sure that we're aligned in our goals first, the vision that we want Michigan to be a welcoming state. And then we work backwards and figure out the plan. And I think that's something we can all get around. So we have to increase revenue for our infrastructure, and we have to get more involved in public transportation. That's one of the major reasons why Amazon didn't choose Michigan, was the lack of a robust public transportation system. We have to, from a social infrastructure standpoint, we have to increase our minimum wage to $15 an hour. Women still make less than men, and doing simple things like not allowing employers to ask what your prior salary history is can make a difference in closing that gap. A bootstrap tax credit, where if you complete a trade certification, then your state taxes would be capped at the pre-certification level for 3 years. So it's a combination of different things, but I think that what's really lacking right now is a consciousness that we want to be a welcoming state, and what are all the different facets that go into that. I don't think that we should be focusing our resources on large companies. We need to focus on pollinating small businesses. And that's what I've done twice. I've been a socially conscious small business owner twice right here in the state. The first time with a business focused on art as therapy to improve mental health, and the second time to improve mental and physical well-being. And women are still very underrepresented in terms of receiving funding. So that's something we need to address.
Thank you. Michelle?
Imagine a Michigan where when you drive across the state line from Ohio into Michigan, the first thing that you notice is not the state of our roads. Imagine a Michigan where we have thriving public education all the way from early childhood through middle school and high school into our universities and graduate school. Imagine a Michigan where, yes, we have great infrastructure, not just roads and bridges, but mass transit, high-speed internet. 50% of our county geographically does not have high-speed internet. That means when kids go home from school, some of them can't do their homework. Teachers are having to create 2 sets of homework, one for the kids who have internet access and one who don't. Has a significant effect on economic development, on education, and equality. Imagine a Michigan with safe water, and a Michigan that is seen nationally as it used to be, as the place to come. My grandfather in California used to say Michigan and Detroit in tones of awe, because in his generation, this was the place. This was the center, the heartland, and we can have that again with the right policies. So yes, we need mass transit, and we can do some things with incentives. The brownfields are great. What about the state level? We required recipients of brownfield money to develop some affordable housing as part of that, right? Because we're having trouble keeping our youth because of the issues of income inequality and because of affordable housing. So I think that the issue of incentives, though, does need to be kept very minimal. In 2016, this state gave more in corporate tax giveaways than it received in corporate taxes. We are engaged in a massive giveaway of money to big business, and that is part of the reason that people like me and some of the commissioners in this room are struggling so hard at the county level to balance the budget and to meet the basic needs for public health, public safety, community mental health, and the other services that we are statutorily required and morally want to provide to the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question goes to Matthew Miller. All the candidates' websites, if you've had a chance to look at them, make clear that they support greater funding for K-12 education. I'd like to ask, how in particular would you revise the funding formula under Proposition A? One. Two, would you continue to permit the state to fund for-profit charter schools?
So, I think this is a very, very simple topic. Public funds belong in public interests. That is our public schools, those are the nonprofit charter schools, those are the ones who are in the education system to take care of our youth. Now, I don't see any reason why we should be subsidizing a for-profit educational venture whose goal isn't to increase the level of learning, whose goal isn't to produce strong students. Its goal is to find a way to pad the bottom line. I've worked in business management since I was 16 years old, and 22 now. I can tell you that when it comes to the bottom line, that's all the company is going to care for. To them, in a business, the people are their capital. So in a for-profit school, their students are their capital. They are a resource for them to try to earn money out of, and not a resource for them to try to educate to grow into a stronger society. So, in addition to that, with restructuring funding for our schools, states like New York, states like New Jersey, they fund their schools differently than we do. I mean, every state does it a little bit different, of course. But they don't use local property taxes to fund their schools. So with that being said, in Michigan, in areas like Ann Arbor, they have high property ownership rates, they have high value property ownership rates. They're able to turn more tax dollars and put them into their school systems. They're able to grow them into very robust, very strong organizations. And unfortunately, 10 miles east of Ypsilanti, and we understand, we see what happens when you have low property ownership. We see what happens when there's low value ownership. The schools start falling apart. Your graduation rates start dropping about 10%. You see college graduation rates dropping almost 40%, the median income dropping almost $20,000. The average income in Ypsilanti is $21,000 a year per capita. That's ridiculous. And it's because we create a cycle of poverty in which we permit this. We allow this to happen instead of becoming the social collective that we should be. We allow ourselves to have winners in the system and have losers. And we allow capital to be expended.
So as a mom of 4, including 2 adopted daughters, education is an issue that's very near and dear to my heart. And I don't know when it happened that we started pitting schools and teachers against, the government started pitting them against us, right? We're all on the same team here. So I think in order to solve any problem, again, you have to start with the vision. What do you want? We want a state where kids are educated to their highest capacity, and they have an opportunity to become contributing members of society. And then, why? Why is it that we want that, and how do we get there? And that's where we tend to differ, is the how. And anytime you want to solve a problem, that's where we get stuck, is the how. Because some people want to do it a certain way, and others of us want to do it a different way. We need to increase our funding and have more consistent funding. I would propose instituting a graduated income tax and direct $750 million of that toward the school aid fund. We also need to tax services to augment the school aid funding. Currently the districts, they have a rapid decline in enrollment, are faced with immediate budget shortfalls. There's also a concern when you have kids that were attending charter schools that switch over to the public school. They're not counted, and the public schools still have to find a way to be able to serve them. So I think this is a very complicated issue, but until we agree on, at a state level in the legislature, what the problem is, what the vision is, do we want to educate all of our kids or not? Do we believe in the potential of all of our kids or not? It's going to be very difficult to make rapid changes, right? So we have to get around that vision. Why is that important? And then how? And we figure it out with these ways. As far as charter schools, I do not think that public dollars should be going to for-profit charter schools. They do not have the accountability or the transparency. And the public didn't allocate these funds to be used for those purposes either. I'm also very concerned about our teachers, because regardless of what we're doing for for the students, if we're not taking care of our teachers, if we're not respecting them, it's going to create a lot of problems. I've had a lot of conversations with teachers, even in this district. People are feeling very stressed out. They're not feeling respected. So when we're suffocating their benefits, what message are we giving to them? And I don't think that this is a progressive or a liberal issue. You know, I've talked to conservative teachers, public school teachers, who feel the very same way. So we have to do a better job of redefining what it means to educate our kids and who it is that we want to take care of.
Education, it's the lifeblood of our community. It's the lifeblood of our state, and it is heartbreaking and wrong that the quality of your education depends almost exclusively on your zip code in Michigan. That needs to stop. We have racial and economic segregation between schools right here in Washtenaw County. Again, that has to stop. The system is rigged against our public schools. Charter schools have devastated the traditional public schools, as has the long-term effect of Proposal A, which was instituted in 1994 with some very good intentions. But over time, the effects of that and the Headley Amendment, which have together basically shifted the funding of our public schools, the responsibility of that, mostly to the state sharing revenue, and have also capped it, the rate in which it can rise. It's just been devastating, and we see the effects now. Michigan used to have schools ranked regularly in the top 10 and 20 of the country. We're now well toward the bottom. So I will be a strong and relentless advocate for education in Lansing. I am an educator. I taught high school in East Africa. I taught middle school, high school. I taught women returning to the workforce in community college. And right now I'm lucky enough to teach poetry and creative writing to adults. I have talked a lot with teachers and with elected leaders on school boards across State Senate District 18 about what needs to happen. And it is indeed complicated. There are little things that we can do. I'm proud to say, working with the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council and Representative Adam Zemke, I played a role in getting more funding, matching funds from the state of Michigan for putting fresh local food, farm food on school children's plates in 3 Ann Arbor school districts, Ypsi, Ann Arbor, and Dexter. So we can do small things like that even in a legislature which is so dominated by Republicans. But what we really need to do is change the dysfunctional way in which our schools are funded. And one of the main things that I think we need to look at is what's called the foundation grant, or the per pupil funding, which comes from the state. And indeed, it moves with the student. So if a student goes to a charter school or a school of choice, that money is removed from their school district. Over 50% of the students who should be in Ypsi's public schools do not attend Ypsi public schools. There's no way a school district can be sustainable with that kind of thing happening and with those trends. I know, I see some amazed looks. It's incredible. Plus, public schools are required to provide services that the charter schools are not. So that is the main thing I would look at, is changing the foundation, the per pupil school funding. Thanks.
Thank you.
So education is the most important thing the state does, and for 6 years in Lansing, when I was there, when Republicans were taking money from our public schools and giving it to for-profit charters and giving it in the form of corporate welfare and tax breaks to wealthy people, I did my best to raise that flag for more education funding. And I think what you're hearing up here are 4 people who are all going to go to Lansing and say, we need more education funding. That's the easy part. What we also need to do is we need to be able to get into the details of the education budget, to know the details, and to be able to work across the aisle to move forward on funding that actually helps our community in a tangible way. When I was in Lansing, we were able to have some success with healthy food. We were able to have some success with at-risk funding. And we were able to have some success with the idea of opening up sinking funds so that schools could use them for more purposes and creating more black ink and more availability to pay our teachers more. So those are some of the things we need to do to improve our schools. We need to try to rewrite Proposal A to increase the availability of funds and to increase the equity of funds. But while we're trying to eat that elephant, we also need to get some things done that increase funding for our schools here in Washtenaw County. Another thing we need to do as far as school funding is we need to realize that not everything that's happening in the schools is happening because of what happens within those walls. We've got schools where there are teachers showing up every day and working hard, who are great instructors, but those schools are getting rated as poor schools and they're being considered as poor schools because of high-stakes testing. And what we know about high-stakes testing is that it doesn't measure the quality of instruction, it measures the income of the parents. And so that's why we have parents in districts here in Washtenaw County who are looking at their school district and thinking, I don't know if I can send my child here. I'm not confident in the quality of the instruction at the school. And it's partly because of the way we're measuring these schools. It's not all about testing. We need to find a way to get the art and the phys ed and some of the other community supports in these schools so that kids can find the inspiration and joy that is part of what school is really all about. In addition, we need to fight childhood poverty. When we look at the school districts that are really struggling with testing and with testing scores and with reading literacy rates, what needs to happen is not just getting into those schools and blaming those teachers for not teaching those kids to read. We need to make sure that those kids are fed when they come to school. We need to make sure that those kids who are facing trauma every night in their home are getting some support, some social support from counselors or other social workers. Those are the kinds of extra supports that our districts that are struggling needs. Haven't had a chance to talk about charters yet. There's a lot to say about charters. We need to reinstate the charter cap. We need to ban for-profit charters. We need to make sure that their budgets are transparent so we can see how much more they're spending on administration and overhead, and so that parents can make sure that those schools are investing that money in instruction and the kids. Finally, we need to make sure that these charter schools follow the rules in terms of accepting special ed kids, and that when they bounce these kids from their schools, they send that extra money back to the traditional community-governed public schools. My time is up.
Thank you. Next question starts with Anuja Rajendra. Affordable housing has become a serious issue for municipalities in District 18. What might the state legislature do to promote the availability of low-cost housing?
I support increasing municipal zoning powers to permit local governments to require builders to provide low-cost housing as a condition of building housing units. I think we also need to bring in lawmakers from other areas that are facing similar issues, such as Detroit and Grand Rapids. We need to learn from each other and understand the shared challenges that we have and find ways to problem solve together. We can form a coalition that would call for a change around this issue. I would advocate for an expansion of subsidized housing with local control to maximize efficiency. I'd also promote low-income housing credits that encourage private developers to create affordable housing for longer periods than just 15 years. We have to make sure that we are not alienating or pushing people out because of new development. And I'm concerned that without action, escalating prices are going to lead to increased homelessness and affordable city housing for youth that are just coming out of school. Michigan has the 6th highest rate of student homelessness nationwide, even though we have the 10th overall student enrollment. And while we're addressing housing, we also need to look at making sure that people have the services that they need when their housing needs are not met or landlords are not following through with their obligations. I've had conversations with mothers of students at EMU, and they talk about how it's so frustrating when the landlords are not keeping up their end of the bargain, but there's no resources for them. And they feel like there's a lot better resources in other parts of the district. So we need to make sure that we're doing a better job of connecting our tenants with the resources that are available in the community to help them get their needs met as well.
Thank you.
I'm so glad of this question. I had 2 constituents come to me a couple weeks ago who live near Clark Road, and they said that their rent was going up nearly 50% over a period of just a couple of months. and they were not young, and they were having to look for new housing. So this is absolutely a vital issue to address. So there are some things that we can do in Lansing to definitely help. We can make it legal to do what's called inclusionary zoning, which is indeed, I'm glad to hear that Anuja is also embracing this, because it's really important. It allows local governments to require developers to have a certain percent of a new development that is approved be affordable, and they can set it at truly affordable rates. Sometimes when you hear affordable housing, people are talking about it being at 60% of your average income, which is not affordable. So not all affordable is created equal. I also think we need to allow local governments to use what it's called soft rent control. Now, we've all heard the horror stories about what can happen with really strict rent control policies in places like New York City, where basically what you're doing is creating a new privileged class where they're passing down strictly rent-controlled apartments from generation to generation. You're not really addressing the affordable housing problem. But soft rent control, what it does is it allows landlords to increase the rent, but at the rate of inflation or some other more gradual metric. So you're not discouraging development, you're not discouraging people from having rental units, but you are stopping things from happening like it's happening to my constituents on Clark Road, where people are basically thrown out of their housing at maybe the time when they're sick or have other issues going on. We also need to recognize that, just take a step back. The reason the housing isn't affordable is because of poverty. So if we address that base problem, the growing income inequality in this country and poverty, if we get a $15 minimum wage, if we provide universal health care, healthcare is the biggest cause of bankruptcy in this country. If we create great public schools so that people aren't trying to take their kids across school district lines and spending time and money could be spent on work doing that. And if we institute a progressive income tax instead of a flat tax to help to fund all this, I think we're going to see a lot of the affordable housing problem solved. So it's two-pronged. We've got to create more tools for local government, and we need to address the problem of poverty and inequality.
Thank you.
Well, this is a very important issue, and this is actually one of the issues that motivated my entry into public service. Back in 1999, I was very, very concerned about the problem of affordable housing here in Washtenaw County. I was very concerned about how we were dealing with homelessness, and I ran for the county commission because local government is an amazing tool to address these issues. As a Washtenaw County Commissioner, we were able to build the Delana Center. We were able to add hundreds of units of affordable housing to our inventory here in Washtenaw County. And I would just encourage all the local officials who are here to keep supporting the organizations that are trying to address this issue here locally. But there are more tools that Lansing could provide. I also support inclusionary zoning. I worked on that legislation when I was in Lansing. I'm certainly be interested in proposing that again to my colleagues up in Lansing if they become my colleagues again. But we also, I think, have some work to do in the details with MSHDA. Governor Snyder has been using MSHDA as a piggy bank for the MEDC for years now. And we need to make sure that we protect MSHDA's, Michigan State Housing Development Authority's resources so that those dollars are really going where they need to be. And we've heard a little bit here already, those dollars need to be pushed down to the actual low-income folks who need affordable housing, not to the developers who are building it, not to the bureaucrats who are handing it out, and certainly not to the MEDC, which is taking some of those dollars and putting it into their standard corporate welfare program. So we need to make sure that MSHDA has more resources to create affordable or subsidized housing that is publicly owned or developer built, and we need to make sure that those covenants last longer, and we need to make sure that we push that benefit further down the income scale. So those are all great ideas and ones that I've worked on. I also agree with my colleague who says that poverty is a key driver of this issue, and income inequality is the problem that is breaking our economy here in America. We have reached levels of income inequality that are so dramatic that it even puts to shame, the late 20s when we all know what happened then. So we're on the precipice of a very, very dangerous place in terms of poverty and income inequality, and state government needs to get serious about it. addressing the housing needs is one way. I'd also be interested in reintroducing the first bill I ever introduced in Lansing, which was the graduated income tax. And I think it's amazing to message on this issue as Democrats, because what it does also is it puts us on the side of most of the taxpayers. And it really draws a bright circle around this issue of income inequality. I mean, if we can actually lower taxes for 95% of the taxpayers here in the state of Michigan and still raise hundreds of millions of additional dollars to put into anti-poverty programs or our roads or our schools, that's just an amazing fact that is, puts us on the side of the 99%, but also, makes the point of how dramatic income inequality is here in the state of Michigan.
Thank you.
This is a pretty personal issue for me. So I'd like to start with a few facts. I want to get into my personal take on this. So, 1988, there was a bill passed that tied up the municipalities' hands to be able to impose legislation on contractors and builders in their areas. You see, it tied up their hands to prevent them from enacting any real form of rent control, to where mayors such as the mayor of Detroit have to send out staff to essentially beg contractors to please take care of the people that you're building around. That's not how this should be operating. This is our city, this is our state. We should be the ones in control of this. So with that being said, as Detroit continues to grow and they continue to get healthier, as Ann Arbor continues to grow and they continue to get stronger, what we're seeing all the folks who cannot afford the rising housing costs that is this gentrification under the guise of urban development. They can't afford these costs. They're being flushed into Ypsilanti. They're being pulled away from jobs that they once worked. They're being pulled away from family-owned homes and communities where they know. They're getting pushed further and further out. And I'm an example of that. In the last few months, I had to move out of my apartment in the Pittsfield Township area because my rent went up over $300 in 2 years. I wasn't able to afford it anymore. My brother actually, my brother had to move in with me to help me take care of the rent. Because on my own, I couldn't afford it anymore. The wages are too low in the area, the housing costs are getting up too high, and folks just like myself, just like people in this room, they can't afford to keep paying rising renting costs. So, as Michelle stated, there needs to be a state-level action, which she talked about the soft rent control. And I absolutely agree with her. We need to take the actions necessary to implement a controlled rent control, where we're not suffocating the landlords while at the same time taking care of the tenants. But at the same time, we need to back away from micromanagement tactics. We saw with Rick Snyder's emergency management protocols that micromanagement doesn't work at the state level here. What it does is it's destroying communities, it's tearing folks apart. We need to back away from micromanagement. We need to back away from this urban development, which isn't urban development, it's an attack on poverty. We need to start taking care of people again, because that's the right thing to do.
Thank you. The next question will go initially to Michelle Deatrick. I just want to ask, I've noticed the microphone is getting further and further away from the mouths. Is anyone having difficulty hearing the answers? Nope, good. Next question. Both the Affordable Care Act and the Children's Health Insurance Program provide health insurance to hundreds of thousands of people in Michigan who otherwise would be unable to access preventive health care. On the other hand, many thousands of Michigan residents who do not qualify for federal subsidies are finding it difficult to afford even the bronze level of insurance coverage under the Affordable Care Act, and find that the high deductibles effectively keep them from accessing routine health care. What can the state do to preserve the benefits and remedy the defects of the Affordable Care Act? Do you support further actions to address mental health issues in Washtenaw County? What actions would you take as a senator to support mental health care?
Lots of good questions squished into one there. So yeah, if you can't hear us, wave at us. The Affordable Care Act has done some wonderful things in Michigan. Overall, we've got close to 1 million people more covered now than we used to have. So that's something to celebrate. And it is indeed true that the prices are going up. In fact, prices for individual plans on the exchange are up over 25% this year. That's huge. For the people who need this, it's going to make a lot of it unaffordable, and that's combined with the fact that we're in the last year of there being a penalty on your taxes if you do not participate in this. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with participation rates. Another concern we have right now is that we have the marketplace for the people who are not qualifying for Medicare. So for about 300,000 people are participating in the marketplace. We have 4 insurers who are participating in this in the UP, and 2 of them have now left the exchange, leaving a choice of only 2 left. That is also a worrying trend. So we also have other problems with our healthcare system in the state, which are not addressed in any way by the Affordable Care Act, or indeed by what I'll talk about in a minute, which is my hope for universal health care in the state of Michigan and in the country. We have a severe shortage of doctors in rural areas, and in fact, every county in Michigan has a veterinarian. A third of them have no OBGYN. So there are equity issues along both racial and gender lines with the healthcare system, and these are long-term issues we need to address, probably through our universities and training and incentives to doctors and nurses to locate where they might not otherwise be able to because of the incredibly high costs of medical training. But so to me, the answer is universal health care, and ideally that is enacted at the federal level. Absent that seeming to be a real possibility for at least the next 2.5, 3 years, I am in favor of the bill that Representative Youssef Rabi is working on to introduce universal health care here in Michigan. And I have been meeting with people, including small farm groups, because small businesses, including small farms, have really feel the crunch, really feel the need for this. And it should cover not just regular medical care, but mental health care, dental, vision. It is tragic we have kids in our schools with rotting teeth. How can they study? How can they learn? How can we do this to them? Healthcare is, in my view, a fundamental human right. It's not a luxury, and that's where we need to move. Thanks.
Thank you.
Healthcare is absolutely a human right, and it's something that I've been talking about since the late 90s. And the problem is that as we keep calling for the federal government to get something done, as we call for our state government to make sure that every single person is insured, there's work that has to be done while we wait, and while people languish without the coverage they need, without the preventative care and the access to doctors that they need. And so that's why when I was a county commissioner, before we even had the ACA, I helped create the Washtenaw Health Plan, which extended coverage to 10,000 uninsured people here in Washtenaw County. That was real, tangible progress for people here in our community. When I was a state representative, one of the things I was proud to contribute to was passing Medicaid expansion. And if you look across the country, there was a lot of Republican state legislatures who did not pass Medicaid expansion. But Michigan did. And one of the reasons is because there was a lot of us in there working hard, working across the aisle to help the Republicans see the truth of this, which is that you don't save money by denying people health care. It costs more money in the end for everyone, and you get worse outcomes. And in the end, we had an affirmative vote to extend coverage to over 650,000 people here in Michigan. Now, the work isn't done. There's still another cohort about that large out there that doesn't have health insurance, and we need to work to close those gaps. Also, we need to make sure that people have full coverage, not just physical health coverage, but also mental health coverage. There has to be mental health parity. We should amend our insurance code to require that every single physical health package comes with mental health parity. Michigan is one of the few states that hasn't done that, and I've been working on a bipartisan coalition to try to get that done. We also need to have leaders in Lansing who understand what it's like on the ground. I spent 10 years in the Washtenaw County Board. We worked hard and made tough decisions to cut other budgets to make sure that our mental health program was strong, to make sure that the workers who were performing that work got paid fairly. And that's very important to me. And when I'm in Lansing, I can draw on all that experience to make this argument. It's not just numbers on a page, millions of dollars flying by on budgets. I've been to the group homes. I've seen the people who are receiving these services. I've talked to them. I've talked to their families. I've talked to the workers who have to do these jobs and care for these people. And that gives me a lot of tools to try to make this personal, to make the anecdote come forward at the legislative debate, because that's what's necessary to soften up the blackened hearts of our Republican colleagues. We also We need to make sure that our essential benefits packages are fair and equitable, especially in terms of gender. There's a lot of services that aren't covered, and there's a constant attack by the Republicans on women's reproductive health services. We need to make sure that the insurance code protects gender equality in health care and even closes some of those gaps. Finally, one of the other things I was really proud to contribute to in Lansing was taking Healthy Kids Dental from a very small pilot program to a statewide program. It's essential that every child here in Michigan has access to a good dentist. And I was really proud to work across the aisle and with folks like Delta to make sure that every single indigent kid in Michigan has good dental coverage now. We were able to expand that to all 83 counties.
Thank you.
So folks, I grew up on Medicaid. Melina, as a matter of fact, I was one of those that received the state benefits through the system. I lived firsthand the issues that happen, or the issues that are caused by lapses in Medicaid for our youth. I have seen, you know, as Jeff mentioned, or as Michelle mentioned, the young folks who have the rotting teeth, who can't focus on their education because they can't even focus on their own health. I was one of those individuals who, as I grew up, I was lacked treatment. I was neglected treatment for issues that I needed, for the folks around me needed. And when it comes to mental health care, I have two anecdotes I want to discuss. There was a young man that I had lived with back in 2012-13. I'm not going to bring up his name, but this young individual was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He was receiving no medication because the state refused to cover it. He couldn't pay for it out of pocket. Obviously, he was 16 years old. He didn't have a job to pay for that sort of medication. The family we lived with, well, I'm sorry, that's the state's responsibility. His insurance lapsed. He wasn't able to take care of himself. The last I knew, he was in a juvenile placement home. I don't know where he is anymore. Access to healthcare, quality, affordable healthcare, that is a human right. There are three truths that we hold, and that is the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to pursuit of happiness. And we have taken these, and we have packaged them up in pretty little boxes and sold them in our grocery stores. Instead of doing what's right and funding Medicare for all, doing what's right and taking care of our youth. So with that being said, I want to see Medicaid expansion to all youth up to the age of 26, not just the foster youth who age out of the system, not just those folks, but to all of them, so that everyone has access to this. Another anecdote that I have for you today, I met with a young man. He's a special education teacher in the Ypsilanti community school systems. He told me about this young boy who was in 6th grade. His family couldn't afford his ADHD medication for an entire month. He told me for the entire month, they had to chase this little boy around the school, who kept kicking him, biting him, doing whatever, instead of being able to focus on his education. An entire classroom of special needs students, special education students, were not able to get the education that is deserved to them because one family was not able to afford the proper medication to take care of their children. In addition to that, we need to expand it to include that gap in healthcare for those who make too much to qualify for ACA, but make too little to actually afford to take care of their children, to take care of themselves. Medicaid needs to start becoming our universal healthcare system here in the state until the federal government can quit sitting on their heels and take care of our people.
Thank you.
So, I think we're all aligned here in our values around healthcare, that healthcare is a human right. Unfortunately, not everybody sees it that way. So how are we going to go about getting things done? When we talk about universal healthcare, when we talk about single payer, how are we going to connect those dots for those who don't get that? I'm a process engineer with a humanistic perspective. And you have to connect the dots between cause and effect for people who don't see it the way that we do. After my second son was born, I was given too much opioids, and it really messed up my system. And luckily, I didn't develop an addiction, but I could have. But instead, I was shuttled in and out of ERs in our community. St. Joe's, the Annex in Saline, and the U of M ER for weeks. And instead of being at home nursing my newborn or playing with my toddler, I was literally fighting for my life in the cardiac unit. And I'm a healthy person. I'm a runner and a dancer. And if we didn't have health care through my husband's employer, which was Ford at the time, I don't know what would have become of me and my family. I was just talking to a gentleman in our community a couple of days ago, and he was telling me that he felt so sad because his mother passed away from cancer recently. She didn't have to die, but she had $4,500 in unpaid hospital bills, and she was afraid to go in and get checked out. If she had gotten checked out earlier, she would have still been alive. So I'm a strong supporter of single payer, but you know what? Single payer makes sense from a humanistic perspective and from an economic perspective. The data supports it. I don't know a single small business owner that doesn't want their employees to come in, right? But they feel suffocated trying to pay those costs of healthcare. Ford, GM, and Chrysler have all gone on the record to indicate that single payer is a competitive advantage for them in Canada. Physicians, nurses, medical professionals who work in the offices are all bogged down with the bureaucracy. They can't take care of their patients because of this bureaucracy. So what I will do is propose a study bill to evaluate the pros and cons and the costs and benefits of single-payer healthcare in Michigan. This has been done in Minnesota and Massachusetts, and the data supports it. But I think that rather than talking in circles around theories, we have to take action, and that's a tangible first step that we can take. And we can bring more allies into this conversation. I'm also a strong proponent of mental health and preventative health care, and I've been serving on statewide and regional appointments for many years around those issues, and my life's work has been focused around mental health and going into underserved communities and helping people to make improvements in their health. I'd like to talk to you about that at another time as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question will begin with Jeff Irwin.
Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm going to. That's a good idea, but I do have a few more questions left.
Nice try.
How have you previously helped other Democratic candidates win their elections, local, regional, national levels? And what actions will you take after becoming a state senator to elect Democrats? Furthermore, in what ways have you been exposed to the legislative process and procedures that would ensure you are sufficiently qualified to take on the role of state senator?
Sure. Let me start with the last question, which is I have a tremendous body of experience in public service. I think that sets my candidacy apart in this array. I have a number of big accomplishments in government that I'm very proud of, on food assistance, on clean energy, on homelessness and affordable housing, on land preservation. That's what sets my candidacy apart here, is that I have tremendous experience in government, and that's what adds up to effectiveness in getting things done for our community here. In addition, not only have I been an elected official for I guess 17 years, I also ran the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, and it was my job to develop cutting-edge environmental policy and hold legislators accountable for that. So I've been in and around the government area for a long time, and I think I'm very proud of my service and record. What have I done to help other Democrats get elected, and what will I do? Well, if I am successful and if I get more votes than other competitors here on August 7th, the first thing I'm going to be doing is going out and helping other Democrats across the state. I want to help bring more colleagues that are in line with my values and our values to the table. So I'm going to be going to Grand Rapids to help Winnie Brinks win. She's going to be in a swing district. She could win. That's on the edge. We got another one over, Colleen Lamonte in the Muskegon area. I'm going to be helping her. There's races downriver in Monroe County. Bill Lavoie has a good chance to pick up that seat. So we need to win those key seats. We need to win a seat in Kalamazoo, where Sean McCann lost by 60 votes last time to Margaret O'Brien. So those are the kinds of races I'm going to be focusing on. And I have a history of being successful with that. I was the campaign chair for the Michigan House Democrats in 2012. That was the last time we picked up seats. We picked up 5 seats that year. I wanted more, so I wasn't satisfied with 5. But that was the last time that we made progress in the state house, was when I was the campaign chair. So I'm very accustomed to traveling around the state, recruiting great candidates, knocking on doors for them, raising money for them. Also, I was an early participant, one of the first participants in the rebirth of the Progressive Women's Caucus. One of the reasons why they gave me the only man-master award, because I was the only male representative who showed up there at that table and said, I want to pitch in on recruiting great female candidates, helping them get elected, giving them the training and support they need from the caucus, writing checks to them and knocking on doors for them. And I'm proud that so many of the folks that I helped early on in their careers are now former colleagues of mine and folks who I might have the chance to work with next year. So I've been very invested in the process of trying to elect a pro-environment legislature. I've been very involved in the process of trying to elect a Democratic legislature. I've been very involved in the process of trying to bring more voices to the table so the Democratic Party can be as strong and diverse as we know we can be.
Thank you.
So folks, obviously I'm a young individual. 10 years ago I was 12. I was actually about 4 months out from the Miller adopted home, hence my last name being Miller. So 12 years ago I wasn't running any boards or holding elected office or really understanding what politics even was. But the thing is that I'm a student. I think everyone here, we all have some form of higher education. I am currently a student. Students do their homework, students study. No, I cannot profess to you right now every single detail that goes into policy development, that goes into legislation. I can't do that. I'll be honest, I won't be able to sit down here and teach you everything that you need to know to write a bill. What I can guarantee is that as a student, and a successful student at that, as a student, I study, and I study hard. I can guarantee that by January 1st, 2019, I will know the ins and outs of policy development, of how to push a bill, how to negotiate. You don't walk into a room expecting to lose. Okay, I think that should be pretty obvious. Yet we see it all the time in Lansing. So with that being said, what have I done to elect other Democrats? Well, being as young as I am, I haven't had a lot of time on the field. I think that should be evident. What I'm doing this year is I have developed a coalition of candidates all over central and southern Michigan to help them get elected. I'm working with Jason Noble in District 19, Mark Bignall in District 33. I was working with Gary Schlack before he dropped out in House District 20. I've been working with Shauna McNally in District 55. I've been working with folks to help them progress and take on red districts, even if we can't win them. Even if we can't win Mount Pleasant, we can still cut the gap. We can still develop a Democratic foothold in those communities. So I don't have the decades of experience, but I do have a passion and a fire that if you look around our country right now, you will see youth leading the way. And I'm part of that. I bring that fire. Another thing is that I have inspired youth around me to start running for small offices, precinct delegates and such, to, even if they don't want to take on a big challenge like I'm taking, and people have been shocked of, Matt, why would you decide to run against some of the strongest liberals in the state of Michigan? Because the youth need to see that we shouldn't be scared to challenge our idols. We shouldn't be scared to take on folks who have more experience than us. We should be ready and willing to step up and take the charge. And I'm not going to sit back and tell our youth, sorry, you need to get more education. You need to wait a few years before you run for office. Because the time is now. We can't sit here and wait another 2 to 4 years. Because if we look at what's happened in the last 2 years with our current presidential administration, I don't know if we have another 2 to 4 years to wait.
I've been a lifelong Democrat and have voted for and supported Democrats for all of my life. I've done everything from phone banking to contributing to campaigns. And I think this is a really interesting question because there are a lot of people, we have a lot of people in this room, and yet there's a lot of people in our community who are not here. And why is that? We have to make sure that we're creating a party and an infrastructure that's welcoming and inclusive of all kinds of people. And no, I have not lived in a political bubble all of my life. I can't spew, policy, perhaps as well as some others can. I'm a real-world person with real-world experience. And I know how to work with people and find ways to get things done. And if we've learned anything from our recent elections, it's the spoken word from people in our communities that helps influence, change, gets people excited about causes, and gets them out to the voting booth. My entire life has been focused around inclusion and empowering people, bringing people of different ages, backgrounds, races, socioeconomic levels together, finding ways to move the needle and get things done. In 2010, before I ever thought about running for office, I was in the real world as a small business owner, a socially conscious small business owner focused on improving mental and physical health. And I gave a TED Talk in Detroit on a concept that I coined called the ego-free zone. And in life, well, in sports, you have one winner, right? And I'm a sports fan, but life doesn't work that way. In the real world, we have space for multiple winners. And I think we forget that in politics when we start to use labels to define other parties and people who don't share the exact same beliefs as us. If we don't use those labels, it doesn't mean that we're not rooted in deeply progressive values. Our values are based upon how we live, who we interact with, what communities that we have been in throughout our lives. And so my values are very much aligned with what my actions have been. So in the real world, we have space for multiple winners. Creativity, collaboration, camaraderie. And I think part of the frustration of people in this state, including all of us here, is the lack of accountability, transparency, and results in our Michigan state government. And why is it that there's a lower set of standards in elected office than for the rest of the world? Because I live in the real world, and we have to get things done. So it doesn't take me, 2 years or 8 years or 20 years in elected office to figure that out. Why is it that we're one of only 2 states where the Freedom of Information Act doesn't affect the legislature and the executive branch? I intend to do something about that because I come from the real world. We don't operate like that.
Thank you.
What I bring to this race that I think makes me stand out from some of the other candidates is a mix of elected experience as an activist, which is current experience in a local elected office, and a lot of experience in policy analysis. So my 5th grade teacher, to her sorrow, could tell you that I've been an activist for a very, very long time, starting with the 5th grade debate about whether women should be paid equally to men. I won that debate against 3 boys and was bullied for several years over it. The term Ms. being used as derogatory, which is pretty amazing today, but maybe not to some of the other women who are my age or older. So I have experience going back as an environmental activist and a small farm rights activist, was one of the co-founders of the Michigan Small Farm Rights Council, and that's experience here in Michigan. I served at the township level on an ordinance committee. I have experience now as the county commissioner. I've gained a lot of experience in a short time. Lots of you know I've only been in the county commissioner for, well, it feels like a lot longer, but coming up on a year and a half. I serve on 7 county committees, and I have learned a lot. And I know from firsthand experience what the things that are happening in Lansing are doing to local government. And I will be able to speak out of that experience, out of what has devastating things happening to my constituents, to my colleagues in the state Senate, to help make the case for doing the right thing in this state. I have a strong background as an educator, and I will bring that lived experience and that knowledge of what we need to do in the classroom to Lansing. I have a master's degree in education policy analysis and spent 4 years as a policy analyst. Here's the thing, it's hard, excuse the language, it's hard to bullshit me. And that's something I've gained a little bit of a reputation for that at the county, mostly in a good way. But I think we need, nasty women. We need, not that I'm nasty, but you know what that means. We need women who are willing to ask the hard questions. We need women in the state legislature. Another thing I bring to this race that's unique is that I have flipped a red seat to blue. And I represent a purple district. So in 2016, when I ran for county commission, I ran against a Tea Partier who held the seat for 6 years, 3 terms, and we beat him by 6 percentage points. We did that by knocking on a lot of doors. I have a strong connection to the grassroots and to the activism. I'm the lead organizer of the Ann Arbor Women's Marches, and the IPSC Anti-Trump March, and we need to leverage that movement and build that movement going forward. I'm out of time, but there's a lot more. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the entire forum is running out of time. We have another couple of items on the agenda for this monthly meeting, and so I'm going to ask the candidates to take 3 minutes to make a few closing remarks, starting with Matthew Miller. But before you start, I want to point out I have about at least 10 questions that were posed that I haven't been able to ask because we're out of time. I believe the candidates will be around for a few minutes afterwards. That'd be fair to say? And so if you have a question for the candidates that was not asked, I encourage you to approach them individually to pose your question. Again, I apologize to those whose questions did not get asked. Matthew Miller.
Folks, thank you so much for having me here this morning. I appreciate you guys getting up early and coming on over. I think a big takeaway that we should have here today is understanding there are folks who will inconvenience themselves to understand what is it like to walk a few steps or a mile in the shoes of the downtrodden, those who are poor, those who have not had a way in life to advance. There are those who write the numbers on the case files, and there are those who are the numbers on the case files. And folks, I've been one of those numbers. I lived that life. Not only have I walked a mile in the shoes of those who have been homeless, not only have I walked in the shoes of those who don't know where their next meal is coming from, who don't know what security the future brings, but I walk them. I have the shoes. I wear the shoes. I know what the life is like, not because I've had to seek it out, but because I live it. So something that I want to bring to the Senate is a very, very, very unique perspective that we don't see in this country. We don't see the empowerment of foster youth growing up in our society. We don't see the empowerment of the impoverished, the empowerment of the downtrodden. But we can. And that's why I want to run for Senate. That's why I want to be your senator. And that's why I'm asking for your vote this August 7th. Is because I have been the one who has been downtrodden. I have been the one who didn't know where the next meal is coming from. And as a student, I can guarantee you that I will be able to find a way to ensure that everyone will know where their next meal is coming from, and everyone will have a warm bed to lay their head at night.
It's been a pleasure speaking with all of you this morning, and I look forward to continuing our conversations. I'm running for the Michigan State Senate18th District because I've lived in Washtenaw County for over 20 years. I was born in Michigan, but I've lived in other parts of the country and the world. And with our civil liberties on attack and a shaded perspective on our priorities, it's really important to have that global perspective. I'm an engineer, a problem solver with a humanistic perspective. I've worked in the nonprofit sector, the private sector. I've been a socially conscious small business owner twice, focused on improving the mental and physical well-being of people in our communities. I served on statewide and regional appointments, focused on mental and physical health. And people in our district and across the state are outraged by the lack of accountability, transparency, and results in our state government. And we need a problem solver, a woman, a mother, someone that represents communities that don't have a seat at the table. And we can talk all we want about other seats that may flip and other women that may be elected, but we have an opportunity to elect somebody with real-world experience from our community right here and now, instead of counting on something that may or may not happen somewhere else. And when you talk to me about, being a voice or a champion for women, that's not good enough. That reminds me of the women's suffrage movement, or before black people were allowed to vote. That, oh, I got you covered. I know what you need. If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And if we're going to kid ourselves into thinking that not having elected office experience is going to be a hindrance in getting things done and being able to work with people across the line, I think we're kidding ourselves. If that's the strongest argument that we can come up with, because Democrats across the state and across the country are supporting and electing women like me who bring real-world experience and problem-solving skills. So when you're working with legislators they're not going to be impressed by how much you can spew policy and, rattle off like an encyclopedia. What we're talking about is building on shared values. That's what's at stake in this election. Representation is at stake. We need people who know how to hear the concerns of other people and not label them. Stay rooted in our values and find ways to reframe how we talk about these issues and get things done. I'm a mom, I'm an engineer, I'm a problem solver, I'm a product of this great state of Michigan. I'm raising my family here. And I am excited and honored to get to know you better and to serve this district and this great state of Michigan as your next state senator in the 18th District. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Michelle?
The great feminist poet, Adrienne Rich, is a great hero of mine. And she thought deeply about the relationship between poetry and politics. I see some people laughing. Yes, I'm a poet, and I'm going to inflict a little bit of poetry on you here at the end. One of Adrienne Rich's poems has the title, "What Kinds of Times Are These?" And it poses a question many of us are asking of ourselves right now, right here, and every day. What kinds of times are these? And this is how the poem in part answers the question. Don't be fooled. This isn't a Russian poem. This is not somewhere else, but here. Our country moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear. As the poem says, there's more than one way to disappear. We can disappear due to deportation, and it's happening around us every day. We can disappear due to incarceration, happening around us every day for reasons that it should not. We can disappear, though, too, because of fear. Fear of speaking out. 1/3 of American writers are self-censoring at this point because of fear of the government and government surveillance and what could happen to them. We cannot get used to the new normal. We cannot get used to the status quo. Politics, like poetry, should be about love. And I don't mean frilly Valentine hearts. I mean fierce, determined, resilient love that does not get up, that fights for you, and that fights for all of us, and that is all of us standing together. In the end, love will overcome. I have the determination, I have the policy chops, I have the movement building skills to go to Lansing and fight with you and on your behalf, and I would like to have the honor of serving as your next state senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for spending some time with us here this morning to compare the candidates. I think it's really important that we have an active debate about who's going to represent this community, because Washtenaw County has a special opportunity, and I would argue a special obligation, to send a fighter to Lansing, to send somebody who's capable and effective and who can move the needle for the people here in our state who need it. Now, I started my life not here in Washtenaw County. I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie in a trailer park and really developed a strong sense of fighting for the underdog. That's a core part of what I'm about. And that's why when I went to Lansing 7 years ago, the first bill I ever introduced was to put forward a graduated income tax. We need to fight for an economy that is fair for everyone. We need someone who's a capable fighter for quality schools in every district, universal pre-K. We need college affordability. We need somebody who knows the details of how to fight effectively for clean water and clean air here in the state of Michigan. We need someone who's going to be a fighter for equal rights, someone who's going to stand up for a strong non-discrimination law for our LGBTQ citizens. We need someone who's going to stand up for the equal rights of people who are from a different place, or have a different skin color. That's something that's missing in Lansing, and we need a fighter from Washtenaw County who's going to stand up on those issues, and who's also going to stand up for the accused. We need someone who cares about criminal justice reform, who's seen what happens down here at the Washtenaw County Jail, who's been to some of our Michigan prisons, who understands the conditions and how they need to change. We need somebody who's going to fight to end the war on drugs. This is a scourge in our community. It makes drug abuse worse. It pushes people down a vortex of addiction and isolation and then victimization. We need somebody who's going to stand strong on gun safety, who's going to keep guns out of our schools, who's going to push for universal background checks, as I have, who's going to not just fight for those big issues, but also every day when those Republicans are out there pushing for expanding gun rights, who can get some little changes, like when I was able to get an amendment to make sure that air guns, when they were deregulated, couldn't be brought into our schools. We need someone who's going to fight for better jobs here in Michigan. Someone who understands the connection between rebuilding our roads, rebuilding our drinking water and sewer systems, and the good jobs that that creates. That's why when I was a legislator, I introduced a bill, or a whole package of bills actually, to reauthorize the Clean Michigan Initiative, to put billions of dollars into good paying jobs, making tangible improvements in our community. And that's the kind of work I want to go back to. And I'm asking for your vote here today, because I think Washtenaw County has an obligation and an opportunity to send someone who's going to be a fighter for progressive values, but someone who's going to be effective in making sure that the people in our the people in our state who need support get it.
I want to thank all the candidates.